All right, we've got lots of exciting topics on the docket this week. We've got EU over-regulations and a little bit of Elon clapback. We got a lot of talk about satellites on the moon and compute in space. A lot of exciting technological stuff. But maybe where we can start is where we left off last week. We had this theory around Elon and his taxes. We haven't seen any major selling, haven't seen any Form 4s. So it's looking like our thesis that we were putting out there about Elon potentially having to sell for some tax reasons could be wrong. So maybe let's pick it up there, Bradford. What do you
Yeah.
think might have happened? Do you think Elon did make this 83B election? And if so, where could we be off on our expectations that we were talking about last week?
So the reason for him making the election would be that he would pay some tax now, about 15 billion, to avoid paying 128 billion in tax later, and also keep more Tesla shares, 15 million of Tesla shares, which would mean he would be avoiding selling 15 million Tesla shares at a later date. Elon's stock and stock options are not like how we own stock. So when things vest, things can happen where Elon has to pay a bunch of taxes. So these are restricted stock units, and when they vest, I believe if he doesn't do this election, then either a bunch of tax is due,
Yeah.
provided he does achieve his milestones, and then they could pay the tax in some different ways. But probably Elon would be selling stock at a later date. There are some options that they have now that they didn't have in the 2012 pay package, where Elon in 2021, faced with those options expiring in 22, did sell a bunch of stock to pay tax.
Yes.
So it then looks like he sold the stock. We haven't seen any Form 4s. Maybe something else happened, which we'll get into in a second, but go ahead, Matt.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, so we're past the 12/6 date. So, theoretically, maybe he could have made the election and is just going to sell soon. But that seems very unlikely to me at this point, since, the language in the filing or in the proxy statement is that Tesla would be owed the tax immediately, essentially. So to me, it seems pretty likely that the our most probable scenario that we were kind of outlining of Elon makes the 83B election and then pays that 15 billion by selling shares of Tesla and giving that cash to Tesla for the withholding tax. That seems not to have been what he did. So then we're left with the options that he did make the 83B election, but is funding it some other ways, which we can get into in a second, or that he did not make the 83B election and therefore will just have to pay the tax upon vesting. So maybe we can pick it up with the did he or did he not make the 83B election? Do you have that? Has your thinking on that changed?
So I think now it's below 50%.
Oh, interesting.
We did have a lot of news. So we heard about SpaceX. Essentially, the valuation from SpaceX went from 350 billion all the way to 800 billion. And some people were saying on a space earlier today that it was changing hands before this at 500 to 600 billion. So Elon's got everyone excited with Starlink Mobile being able to sell customers from version 3 Starlink satellites, and SpaceX buying that spectrum, the $17 billion spectrum purchase that allows them to do this. But then he's been talking a lot about data centers in space.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that.
Yeah, throwing out some crazy numbers, talking about putting a satellite factory on the moon and a mass driver on the moon to get the satellites launched into a lunar orbit. But even having these data centers in orbit around Earth would be a really big deal. I know you did some diving into looking at the advantages or disadvantages of putting it up in the moon. I mean, up in orbit. rather than data centers here on Earth. Um, so, one wonders, did Elon suddenly sell 15 billion in SpaceX stock? Um, I think that's below 50% chance.
Hmm.
I think that's how they would have come up with the money for the taxes to do the 83B election.
Yeah, and I did see some people commenting that, since we haven't seen any selling of Tesla, but at that same time, when we were thinking there was a good chance of seeing some Form 4s and some Elon activity, that's right when we started hearing all this chatter of kind of private sales and the SpaceX, valuation increasing and all that. So there was some speculation that, okay, maybe he did make the 83B election, but he funded it by selling SpaceX shares. I
Yeah.
tried to dig into this. I couldn't find any indication that there was actually some a funding rounded now. Every kind of article and that quoted insiders with knowledge of the matter, which you got to take those with a grain of salt. But it sounded like they were preparing for another round at a potentially higher valuation.
Yeah, funding round's a strong language. So, like Elon said that they were not raising capital.
Yeah, true.
So it's likely employees trading the stock at an $800 billion valuation. So potentially, it could be confidential. Potentially, Elon could have done it, and maybe the venture capitalists found enough buyers. There's a ton of demand for SpaceX shares.
Yeah.
I'm guessing even at 800 billion.
Yeah, well, you're right to point out that funding round is not the right language. I mean, it's really a liquidity event. Is
Yeah.
probably the better way to put it. But in that case, like even then, it doesn't sound like that was something that was happening live in the last couple of weeks. It sounds like that's something that they could be preparing for. But even if that is the case, it could, in my mind, it raises the probability that maybe Elon took out a margin loan in anticipation of some sort of SpaceX liquidity event in the next 12 months or so. So it's possible that he did this 83B election, is funding it in the short term with debt, and is planning to sell some SpaceX shares at a pretty nice valuation in order to fund that. He wouldn't have to give up massive percentages of control to come up with 15 billion. I think he owns about 32% of SpaceX, if my memory is right. So it would be a decent amount that he'd have to sell, 15 billion out of 800, math, but
be around 2%.
Yeah, so he still own nearly 30% or so. So he'd lose a bit there, but not crazy. So to me, that seems like a reasonably plausible way that he could have handled this. And if that's the case, then yes, Tesla wouldn't have any kind of selling pressure in the near term because of this.
Yeah, I thought a margin loan was unlikely because he did not use a margin loan back in 2021 to sell the shares to buy when he sold the shares to pay taxes on his employee stock options. He did use borrowing when he bought Twitter, but I think he did like half borrowing and half equity, and he also brought in some outside equity investors. Yeah, so it's looking unlikely now, but maybe he did something through SpaceX. What I'm curious what you think about James Catt. He had this video where he posited, and a lot of people were in agreement, including Larry, that allegedly with Elon's comp plan for 2025, it's almost like an all or nothing.
So I didn't see
That's the
the
way I heard
video
it.
in question, but I mean, yeah, it is basically an all or nothing. I think.
Like he has to earn all the tranches or he earns none. Is
Oh,
that
no.
correct?
I don't think that's correct. No, so
Okay.
maybe I should watch the video to get a better understanding of what what they were saying. But no, there are you can earn some of the tranches. The market cap milestones go up by 500 billion or so. So you need to hit a market cap tranche and a like an operational tranche. I forget exactly how they phrase
Yeah.
it in there, but when you get two of those together, it vests upon kind of ratification, I believe, of the board, showing that you or that he did meet that milestone.
So I think we got to review that one. But it does look like we were wrong as far as Elon selling Tesla stock to do the 83B, and maybe he arranged something with the banks or with SpaceX to elect to do it. I do think it would preserve Tesla shares overall
Hmm.
for him to do it. And I'm guessing, well, maybe he thinks SpaceX will 8x from here, or Tesla will 8x from here.
Hmm.
That's how much future tax you're avoiding. But like overall, you're saving Tesla shares by doing it, even if
Yeah.
you sold Tesla shares now to do it. So maybe we should move on for the moment.
Well, so
Um,
I do want to just one last point on that. It still is possible also that he used this net settlement feature. And if
mhm.
that's the case, like he could have made this 83B election, and Tesla would essentially be paying this tax bill out of cash. I think that's very unlikely, but I do want people to at least keep in mind that that's a possibility, and we likely wouldn't find that out until late January when they release their Q4 earnings report.
Mhm.
So that's one possibility that's still in the air and out there, and people should not be shocked if that does happen. Although I do think it's very unlikely.
Yeah. So in the meantime, we've had some good Tesla news. Just reviews out of Europe, reviews of version 14. We've seen more videos of it doing really good stuff and being very
Hmm.
safe.
Hmm.
Maybe it's annoying sometimes, but it's very safe in comparison to even version 13, which was really good. So the stock's been kind of marching a little higher. Um, I I think maybe it'd be interesting if we played a little bit of the skeptic right now
Ooh.
around some of the positive news.
Oh, are we just going full on bear here, Bradford?
No,
No. All right, good.
but like I yeah, I'm wondering where things go from here. We haven't seen the rollout get super beefy with robotaxi.
Hmm.
They did double the number of robotaxis in Austin from like 15 to 30.
Hmm.
Uh, and I
No,
think
don't say from
they
15 to
increased
30. Just say they doubled the number. Like that's a much more impressive thing to say.
yeah, and it went up above 100 in the Bay Area. Um, if you told me back in June that we'd only be around 150 robotaxis at this point, I'd be really disappointed.
Sad Bradford.
uh, and I'm seeing Waymo with 2,500. I know, Tesla can make 2,500 Model Ys and press them into service if they were driverless in a day's time. But Waymo, it is very serious. They're gaining more traction. Um, I I feel like Tesla needs to hit the go button soon, or um, like could this be Waymo's to take from here, Matt? Like I don't think you can assume a company like Google is not going to make more cars. They don't have a ton more cars they can get from Jaguar or whoever it is, but
Jaguar.
um, Jaguar.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some risk that Tesla doesn't pull the trigger soon?
No,
And
so I was actually just going back to my model, pulling it up to see where I thought they'd be at the end of Q4. And I had them at 500 vehicles in the fleet by the end of Q4. So, actually, I think they're pretty close to on pace with my expectations. Um, that said, I have them getting to 2,500 vehicles in Q1, and ramping pretty aggressively after that. Getting to over 10,000 in by Q2, and close to 40,000 by Q4 of next year.
mhm.
Um, like in my mind, the quantity of vehicles they have in Q4 of next year is way more important than whether they're at 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 today. Um, I think it is sort of a binary event or yeah, a binary event like whether you have the safety monitors in the car. Once you kind of go over that event horizon, there's really no going back. That's when you can scale up very aggressively, and you better be very darn sure that you don't have major safety problems with the software version at the point at which you take those safety monitors out. So, I to me, it feels like they probably could take them out today, but they're being extra cautious about wanting to make sure that the data supports their view that they actually are safer than human before they take them out. So if I don't know 3 to 6 months from now we're still like around 1,000 or something like that, and we still have safety monitors, to me that'd be signs of I don't know, warning, or things are really not going to plan. But they said on the last call they're going to be a little overly cautious on this, and they don't want to take any risks. And I think that's super important, so that when you do enter that binary event and take the safety monitors out and you can start scaling, then like that's when you're talking about the real upside to FSD. So I think they're playing the long game here, which admittedly is like kind of lame when Elon talks about like doubling the fleet in Austin, and people who know the numbers are like, okay, that's like really deceptive and like like just like kind of lame.
They did release the Robotaxi app in a number of countries, including Japan, Australia, a number of other countries. That's pretty exciting, but I'm guessing that they're maybe tracking downloads to see interest, and then maybe use that to figure out hiring. Do you think we suddenly see like a dozen robotaxis in these different countries? Like, why do you think they suddenly released that app? And I think this was like over the weekend or something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty recently. I do think your hypothesis there is right. Like you want to see, okay, where are a ton of people downloading this? That's a good like proxy or indicator for what your ultimate demand might look like. So if you're expecting Japan to be a soft market because of all the national players there, for instance, but then you see that the downloads are extremely high, okay, well maybe you bump that up in your like prioritization of which country you go after next. So I think that's just useful data. But I think the priority is going to be scaling in the United States for the foreseeable future. That said, I think if this 14.2, even 14.3, which is going to be coming pretty quickly, it seems to be a more or less universal model that's working extremely well in many different jurisdictions. I think there are some things that it needs to clean up that would be problematic if they scaled robotaxi aggressively right now. Like the school speed zones is one example. Had a couple issues with, actually I just had one issue, but like with trying to roll over a curb. But I know I'm not the only person who's seen that sort of behavior. So you don't want to like start damaging vehicles or getting a ton of tickets because you're disobeying signs for school zones. So I think there's some stuff like that they need to address. And then once you get to the point where not only is it very safe, but you're not getting tickets every 2,000 miles or something like that either, that's when I think you'd want to start rolling out a bit more aggressively.
I did want to share my screen about a poll. So I'm wondering where we come out with deliveries for fourth quarter, because it looks like people are a little too optimistic around deliveries. So I'm going to share my screen here. If we could do the view, show that there. So, what that's showing is 25% are saying that deliveries would be between 375,000 and about 412 and a half. Another quarter around 412 and a half to 450. 30% are between 450 and 487. and then 18% above that. So, it's pretty wide range. And so why did I do such a wide range? Well, I think a lot of people are thinking that earlier in the quarter that maybe Tesla was going to do around 500,000 deliveries this quarter. What Troy Tesla is like around 408, and he keeps like lowering his number. And you can subscribe to him on Patreon to get the latest numbers from Troy Tesla. I think that would be a very negative shock for Tesla bulls and others. I know like Robotaxi is all that matters. And, the safety monitor still isn't out. Here we are. It's December 9th, 2025. Got, 22 more days till the end of the year. Safety monitor is still there. And we got fourth quarter deliveries maybe a bit soft. Wall Street's at 450, but they often don't change their numbers until the very end, and then they'll move their numbers toward where Troy's numbers are. So Troy's a lot lower. They'll just kind of like copy his homework and choose a number he's doing and make an excuse for it. What do you think people are too optimistic on this quarter, and how do you think people will view it if it's like closer to 400,000 rather than closer to 500,000?
Yeah, I do think people are probably a bit too optimistic in general. I think when we were coming out of this $7,500 tax credit expiring, a lot of people were like, okay, yeah, sure, maybe there was a bit of pull forward, but at the same time, like people are also realizing that the Model Y is like outstanding, and we're kind of getting over some of this anti-Elon political drama. And so I personally felt that we'd have a strong quarter, and I was kind of thinking something like 450 or so, just because we were getting some of those factors behind us, and admittedly, like, China and Europe seem like they're doing really strong. So, why is Troy coming up with such a low number? And it's all in the US. So he's tracking VIN data's, very scientifically in the same manner that he has for a very long time. That's, proven to be very accurate over time. Not that it's perfect. He's had a few quarters that are, pretty decent misses, but for the most part, I don't think anyone has a track record anywhere close to what Troy's has been. And what he's seeing from the VIN data is that, production is significantly lower. And that's what's, and he's continuing to lower it. Like his own expectations are being lowered as he's seeing this VIN data continue to be released. So, I think if we get something close to 400,000 and I think he's at 406 right now. So if we dip below that, like anything with a 3 handle, I think would be perceived very negatively. Taking that step back, like I actually do agree. Somebody had this comment, like, delivery is not important at the moment. I kind of agree, in the long term, this doesn't really matter. But thinking about where we are right now, so much of the mind share right now is on autonomy. That like we're seeing Wall Street analysts starting to talk about this and like talking about how like the average Joe doesn't really realize how big of a deal this is yet, and that's why Tesla's a must own. So I think that's a lot of what's driving the recent run up in share price that we've had. Is people are trying 14.2.1. Analysts are starting to give them a little partial credit for it, and I think that's kind of as it should be. At the same time, as we get closer to quarter end, attention naturally shifts to what's the production and deliveries going to be, what is the Q4 earnings going to look like, and a lot of these analysts are going to be going back to their models and say, oh, we've got to take this down. And if your U.S. sales are lower than you were expecting in Q4, I don't see how that doesn't carry forward into Q1 as well. So maybe your Q1 numbers need to get a haircut. So I do think this is potentially a bit of a negative catalyst. I do agree in the long term, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the story is still going to be autonomy. And what matters way more to me as an investor is how quickly are they removing the safety monitors and kind of ramping up the vehicles out there. But I do think that this is some of the mind share is going to switch in the coming weeks from autonomy and 14.2 and robotaxis toward production and deliveries.
So in about 5 minutes, I hope that we start talking about a little more about satellites. You and I had a big
5 minutes.
conversation about satellites, but let's still talk a little bit about Europe. Tesla made a really big move, offering all these free FSD rides. Government officials, journalists, automobile journalists, even those who have never said a positive word about Tesla in the past, they are just lavishing praise on Tesla FSD. Tesla got approval in Spain to operate 19 cars autonomously. It seems very positive, and there has been a spurt of orders where people are buying the Model Y. They're buying FSD, even though they still can't use it in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like ultimately these committees, which I feel are run like by BMW and others, allegedly BMW is just a note taker, Matt. Just a note taker. Oh, we're just taking notes here. I feel like I'm a little skeptical that much will come from this in Europe. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I also am. And I think there's been a lot of people dunking on Europe recently, myself included. And I don't want this to be like all kind of jingoistic America is awesome, kind of chat. But at the same time, like to me, it just seems like Europe is shooting themselves in the foot with over regulation and with trying to favor some of the some of the domestic companies that they have there. We've seen this with Airbus. We've seen this with the rules that were favoring BMW's approach to autonomy. And then we've certainly seen a lot of this in the tech space, like with fines on a lot of the Meg 7 and most recently on XAI or on X and Elon individually, which is like kind of wild for saying like blue check marks are somehow misleading because it's not like journalist. Just the logic of it just makes no sense. But coming back to Tesla, to me, it just seems like we've had so many false starts over the years. There was a lot of promise that like Norway was going to lead on some of these regulations, and then there was some hope that Netherlands would, and UK had some kind of promising regulations that if they adopt it, then the rest of the EU would automatically adopt it. Case, who is on X, you guys should all follow him. He works for Mr. Green in the Netherlands, a large Tesla company or a large Tesla fleet owner operator. They lease their cars out to a bunch of Europeans. And like he's been tracking these regulatory developments very closely. And it seems like over the last 3 or 4 years, he's had a lot of these posts out there that were like, okay, this regulatory development is happening right now. And so like FSC is finally going to get the green light. But here we are in late 2025. And it's still like very neutered. There's all these little pilot programs that seem promising, and then they never go anywhere. So I'm a little frustrated by how much Europe has hamstrung Tesla's FSD regulations for something that, like, to me, the job. I think regulators actually are important, but the job should be to promote public safety. And if you're actually hamstringing safety technology that saves lives because you want to make sure that it deterministically saves lives in the manner that you have predetermined, as opposed to just like objectively it's saving lives, that's just beyond stupid. And I think it's really frustrating that that's the approach that Europe seems to be taking.
We don't care about lives, Matt. We care about jobs.
I mean, that's like, they would never say it that way, but I've seen a lot of the European regulators on X and stuff, and they post this stuff that kind of sounds like somewhat reasonable. But then if you kind of look at it a little bit more objectively, it's just like we're promoting the public welfare, which means like creating jobs or something like that, and it excludes like promoting safety with innovative approaches. So I don't know. It just like it's almost like we've got different way that we're using language, which I don't know. Maybe that's a topic for another time. But it just seems like there's a little bit of like 1984 speak, where they're kind of using words in a way that is different from the way that I think normal people would interpret them.
So let's talk a little bit about the fine on X by the EU, and then we'll talk about satellites in space, data centers in space. Um, in the past, with the Biden administration, and I believe Trump administrations have done this as well. They put pressure on the EU to not levy these fines on U.S. tech companies. So this has been part of like the diplomatic negotiations between the U.S. and the EU. A lot of these companies also try to avoid paying taxes. So some of these fines may be a way for them to try and collect tax on these tech giants. There's a lot of terrible regulations like around website cookies. It's just a bane on all of our existence, even in the U.S. So I guess, what are your thoughts on this fine that the EU did on X? And I'll share mine real briefly. It's like, they're calling the blue check mark deceptive, but I think a lot of people with the gray check mark are the deceivers. These are people in politics and in the media, and those are the ones deceiving and gaslighting us. And they're calling X fascist, but then they're the ones trying to censor speech.
In like very aggressively censoring speech. And I mean, I think long-term viewers won't be surprised my views on this, but like there's been so much like misinformation along all the other media outlets. I mean, go back to COVID. I mean, this is, I think people are well aware of the Twitter files by now, and the coordinated efforts with governments around the world, including in the US, but also in Europe, to push only their own narratives, and to have these companies essentially neuter any voices that were dissenting, even if they were factually accurate. And that's anathema to free speech. Now, granted, the EU doesn't have a lot of the speech protections that we have in the US, and so that should be managed according to their laws, and not the US's kind of standards. But at the same time, like to be fining for like these like deceptive practices around blue check marks, like it just makes zero sense to me. Like they were very clear in communicating that they were going to try to target or eliminate bots by minimizing voices, by having like a verified kind of ID to get the blue check mark. You have to actually show your ID to get the blue check mark. And so when I was reading through the blue check mark part of the fine, and it was like how it can like promote fraudulent activity, or I forget exactly how they worded it. It was like, wait, like they're actually requiring an ID check in order to get the blue check mark. How is that like clamping down on?
How's that promoting fraudulent?
Promoting misinformation, or like fraudulent activity or misinformation. But I think when you just call like information you don't like, or like Elon has obviously been very aggressive on kind of criticizing a lot of migration policies in the EU, and I would just say the EU in general. I think people should not underestimate how poor of a taste it left in a lot of Europeans' mouth when Elon was promoting the AfD in Germany. And I think he made a lot of enemies there. And it was kind of hilarious in the announcement. They're like, we want to make clear this has nothing to do with free speech, or like the type of content that's on the platform. It's like, well, it's like exactly what it's about. Like, you don't like Elon. And
I think Meta even has like some verified stuff that they've been rolling out, and they haven't been fined yet.
Yeah. Meta did something almost exactly what what X did, in terms of the blue checkmark kind of program. And nothing there, because Zuck will kind of flip flop, and he doesn't go as hard in the paint with some of these regulations and rules as Elon does. But to your original point, Bradford, I did want to kind of share this graph that I posted earlier today. This is on the right. You've got like actual tax income in 2024 for a lot of EU tech companies, and on the left you've got American tech companies and the fines that they were levied by the EU in 2024. Obviously higher there. Now, I think there were some reasonable criticisms that the bar on the right in particular might have been cherry picked a bit. One obvious example is ASML is not in here. The Dutch lithography giant. So I think there's some stuff that was maybe cherry picked to tell the story from a pro-US kind of anti-EU point of view, and I think that's a fair criticism. But at the same time, I mean, man, just look at these dollar values of the fines for Apple, for Meta, and then just putting this into context, Elon and X are going to get an Apple-sized fine on that. So like they're paying, assuming the 24 numbers are pretty similar to 25, Elon and X are going to pay more in tax than SAP, which is like pretty wild. Or pay more in fines than SAP is going to pay in tax. So yeah, it's leaving a bit of a bad taste in my mouth that there's so much regulation, such a lack of innovation. You do have a couple good companies like ASML, like Spotify, but
yeah, I think why ASML was not included is they're also a capital equipment company, but really it's tied to technology.
It'd be like saying Nvidia is not a tech company.
Yeah, it's tied directly to TSMC being able to make the chips the way they do. They need the lenses and other stuff from ASML. So let's talk a little bit about space.
All right.
I'll just say this: it's pretty crazy that the fines are like about the same amount compared to like the taxes on their own tech industry.
Like that's crazy. I mean, what if we were taxing European company or like fining them, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars? Like there'd be an outcry. And I was doing some digging into this too, and like there's a very significant outpacing that the U.S. has of the EU in recent years, especially since 2019 or so, in terms of real GDP per capita. And I think you and I, and presumably a large chunk of our audience is kind of unapologetic capitalists. Like we know that innovation and profit motives are a good way to increase economic outcomes for everybody. That's obviously a very American point of view, but I also think is like objectively true that capitalism, while not perfect, is like by far the best system for raising everyone's standard of living in a country. And it just seems that Europe is getting more protectionist, less innovative, because like how can you innovate when you're trying to deal with all these regulations that change all the time? And it's just the entire environment seems to be a bit of a mess, and that's pretty unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, and I think it'll negatively impact Tesla. So like, when I think about valuation for Tesla and valuation on Robotaxi or Optimus, I'm thinking mainly it's going to be in the US. Maybe Optimus might have some role to play in Europe, but I'm guessing they'll figure out how to ban that too. So let's share what Elon said about space. So he might have been playing a Dyson Sphere game over the weekend when he wasn't doing some rounds of Arc Raiders, which is the new hot extraction shooter. So Elon talked about having an NV link, which is like 72 NVIDIA on one satellite. So you got like this big server. It's like probably 6 feet tall. It's got this big spine where everything's wired together. That awesome. Would be about 100 kilowatts per satellite. And then Elon's talking about getting 1 million of these up, which is pretty crazy. So kilowatts to megawatts would be 1,000.
Hmm.
So like Colossus, I think they're targeting, is it 100 megawatts? Do they have 100 megawatts already in compute there?
I think they're at a gigawatt. I think they're trying to scale. They're maybe not up and running. I think it's like 100,000 H100 equivalents or something like that. No, but they're definitely over 100 megawatts. Most of the terrestrial data centers now are trying to get to gigawatt scale, and I think Colossus is first to that landmark.
So so then he goes crazy, like as if like a million satellite data centers above Earth isn't enough. He's talking about satellite factories on the moon.
Hmm.
I did not study the moon's regolith before this live stream. Apologies. And having a rail gun project the satellites from the moon to a lunar orbit, without the need to propel it, because one cool thing about the moon is it doesn't have much of an atmosphere, if any. So you could just quickly move something to very fast velocity, and you don't need to worry about friction or heat shielding that much with the
Hmm.
moon. So then he's talking about like a billion satellites of compute. Um, so pretty wild stuff from Elon. And we'll show this one too. So just more there on.
Yeah. So
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, Elon's been talking about like the Kardashev scale, and like, if you in the long arc of civilizations and like the millions of years kind of time frame, then you need to start using your entire solar system's you know um, output from the sun as a source of energy. That has always struck me as like very kind of out there, and like, oh yeah, sure, we'll also terraform Mars at some point, like 2,000 years from now, maybe, if everything goes well. So I never really gave it too much credence for any sort of kind of near term opportunity. But with Elon kind of talking about this more and more, and seemingly in the pretty near term, it started kind of prompting me to think about the trade offs. And there are some pretty serious like costs associated with running data centers on land that you could avoid if you do have this space based. So some of the obvious ones would be cooling. That's a huge portion of the overall electrical load, and especially the equipment cost that goes into running these data centers. Then you got land acquisition costs, all the development costs, with permitting and everything that goes into that. And then obviously the fuel cost. So your electricity to actually run these data centers is like it's a massive amount. So like if you instead put these data centers or these GPUs in space, you get radiative cooling. So it's like a passive methodology where you can just use the emptiness of space as a heat sink, essentially an infinite heat sink. So that eliminates like the need for the all the cooling infrastructure and then the electricity to run that. And then you can
So
obviously.
Let's pause here. So I think there's some people who don't understand this. So space has no medium; it's a vacuum, so you can't transmit heat through traditional means of having a bunch of
Like
surface
cooling
area
fans.
and fans, and then it radiates off with the medium, whether it's air or liquids. But if on the back of these solar panels you can have a radiative cooler, essentially, where it projects infrared. It projects the infrared energy out into empty space. Um, so you can transmit the infrared light or infrared energy without needing a medium. So
Hmm.
like that's how you do it. That's how they do it with the ISS. ISS has been in space for, I don't know, has it been 20 years yet?
I think they were building it in the 90s, so around there, something like that.
It's been up there a long time. So they have solar panels, and they I think they have radiators on it too, but even if they don't, they've been developing radiators for space for some time. So that's how they would cool it. I think cooling for data centers is about 5% of your cost, but the electricity is a big piece of the
It's a huge
cost.
piece. Yeah. So essentially, if you think of the economics of a data center, and this is something I'm gonna put pen to paper on a bit more intensively, but you'd be kind of making a few trade-offs. So yeah, you save on some of the upfront capital costs with the cooling equipment, but you'd be incurring presumably much higher capital costs up front with the launch cost, and then especially the solar panels. So then the benefit on the solar side, though, is you're saving on fuel costs. You essentially have zero marginal fuel cost, but you've got to
Mhm.
launch a massive amount of solar panels to space. So like, how does that math all kind of pencil out? And as I was thinking about it, I do need to actually run through the exercise, but um, it's not as obvious of this is a terrible trade-off as I was initially thinking. Especially I think you have to have Starship in order for this to make any sense. It has to be fully reusable. There's no way you can kind of like expend a rocket stage in order to launch some solar panels and GPUs into space and have that work out. But presuming they can actually get that piece figured out, then the extra benefit that you have is that the solar panels could be in a sun synchronous orbit and essentially get like a 90 to 100% capacity factor, meaning if you've got a 100 watt panel, let's say, on average in on a land-based application, you might only be getting 25 watts because the sun is setting. There's the entire nighttime period. But if you have this in an orbit where it's always facing the sun, then you could be running constantly at 100 watts. Well, that massively changes the economics of powering these, and then that also just gives you constant power to run your GPUs. So that makes that's a huge, like, very very massive cost driver. So or cost saving kind of difference. So I'm getting pretty excited about the opportunity for this. I think it could be huge for the Nvidias, the Googles of the world to just have more kind of GPU sales, as I think we're going to need a lot more compute for pretty much every application. I think it could be exciting for some solar panel manufacturers, and it's definitely hugely bullish for SpaceX.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm excited about it, and we'll have to do a subsequent video where we actually run some numbers on it.
So I want to share just how I envision this because, admittedly, I'm not a data center expert or anything, but I have done a lot of reading on this even before Elon was talking about it, more publicly. Um, so, one question is like, we're throwing around the word data center. Um, what do you need for a data center? Like, really, what you need for a data center is enough computers to run a large language model to run inference on them.
Hmm.
So I think it'd be difficult to just have all these launches up into space. And then, like, once they're in space, you got to bring them all together and then, connect them physically or get them in a tight area. And then, figure out the solar panels, have like one giant solar panel. I think it makes more sense for it to be spread out. And that's what Elon talked about. So I think the low hanging fruit is to run inference in space, not do these huge training runs where you want like 100,000 or a million of these, all wired directly together. Um, so you have like 72 of these and maybe one satellite. The satellites could potentially talk to each other, with lasers. Um, so if you do need them
Lasers.
to work together, you could do that. But essentially, all you want to be doing is running inference. There is some lag to beam a signal up to space and then beam it back down, but I think that's only going to be around 400ths of a second. So when you're doing inference, and I've done some that's extremely fast. There's a company called Cerebras. They're really fast. A Grok with a Q is very fast. They have custom silicon. there's still like a 1 second delay where you send it out, it maybe something needs to load or something, and even though it's very fast, it takes a second to come back to you. So I don't think having them in space is going to make it worse, measurably worse. I think it'd be valuable to have the inference loads in space, because of the whole power savings and that trade-off. So that's how I view it. Where not necessarily you don't need all these physically together or in a very tight space together. Then you got to figure out the solar panels, and you don't want the solar panels banging into each other.
Yeah,
I think it's mainly going to be inference and not training.
I think that's a key point. Yeah, I was at a conference several months ago where they were talking about how the Stargate project from OpenAI is being built out, and there, like, one of the huge considerations was, okay, what is the physical different distance between the two GPUs that are furthest away from each other in this like massive building, this complex.
Compound, right?
And if you're doing like a massive cutting edge training run, that physical distance and that latency is extremely important in minimizing that as much as possible. But you're right, for some inference workloads, that becomes much less important. And as I was kind of thinking about this, I'm not sure exactly how it would be handled, but let's just say it is a kind of chat GPT, query type of workload that you're shipping to one of these satellites. Presumably there'll be, thousands, eventually millions of these, GPUs, satellites that would be, kind of swarming around. And so then I think the kind of mechanism you'd have is, because even a lot of these data centers now, the inference data centers are still kind of like centers where they're centralized. But I think you would essentially have like some software that would say, okay, this query is going to this satellite, this query is going to that satellite, and you'd have like one dedicated, satellite that's working on yours, and depending on the intensity of the query, maybe a few other queries as well. So it's an interesting notion.
It generally be fast, so I don't think it'd be need to be dedicated. And if for some reason, one satellite could communicate to the other before it beams down. So like if it comes out of view or it finishes, it could be, you can use the constellation. They already have experience with the constellations and communicating things by lasers. See, there's another question. I think around timing, we want to share some thoughts about timing, but Stephen had another good comment. You have XAI with the models and the software, Tesla with the AI chips, Solar's in the chip fabs, Solar City. You got the solar panels from Tesla. I'm guessing Elon's going to want to try to make the solar panels, but it might be a very specialized type of solar panel you need for space. I know you're going to be looking into that more, Matt. And then SpaceX for launch, and you get data centers in space for low cost. So launch, I think you need Starship for this to work out. Starship's not totally ready yet. They're experimenting with different things with reusability and the tiles and all this. When do you think the SpaceX is going to figure out Starship and really start bare minimum putting V3 Starlinks in space for Starlink Mobile, and then start sending data centers up into space, both for XAI and for others?
Yeah, so I think we're probably at least a year away from them really getting to significant amounts of kind of commercial payloads in Starship. I mean, they've been testing this now for quite a long time. There was obviously a series of those flights all in a row. What was it, 3 in a row, I think, where Starship disintegrated upon reentry. I mean, this is a very hard problem. I mean, anyone who knows the relationship between the entry velocity and the speed and the heat that you need to dissipate. It's just like, it's a wild problem. And the fact that they're even so close is like an engineering marvel. But still, you're in this situation where there's structural damage being done to these ships on reentry. Now, some of that's intentional with them removing heat tiles to kind of see where these failure points are. But, you know, every time, I mean, it seems like the flaps are just barely hanging on. And, you know, there's been like a lot of like, you know, plasma kind of cutting through the structural integrity of the starships. They've been able to land safely still, and huge credit to the SpaceX team for that. But in order to truly get these launch costs down, I mean, you can't say, you presumably can't be having, you know, structural damage done to these starships on a regular basis. Otherwise, you can't reuse them, or there will be significant refurbishment time and cost, which adds to the overall launch cost. So I think it's probably another year or so of them working on, you know, the tiling that they're going to use and any other changes that they need. Potentially, you know, they might need to change course if this tiling approach that they're on right now doesn't end up getting the results that they were hoping for. They might have to kind of go back to the drawing board a bit and, you know, look at some of the other approaches that they were looking at previously. I mean, one of them was using the fuel as like a cooling mechanism for the structure, for the superstructure. Another one was like actually having like some fuel being released into the skin of the ship, essentially, which sounds crazy, but that would actually be reducing the surface temperature of the steel. So if they are simply aren't able to reduce the surface temperature to kind of low enough levels with the current approach, there could be some more significant engineering redesigns that they need to do, which could add to time. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, you know, I think we're maybe a year, hopefully, you know, out from you know, them being able to
or two worst case.
Worst case.
You know, when the CEO of Google says like this is going to be in 10 years, I think they're wrong. And I think they'll get access to SpaceX launches, you know, much sooner than that. So I think it's a couple of years out, and they're starting to make you know, their own pad in Florida, so they could do launches from Florida. I'm curious if they're gonna get some kind of site in New Zealand. You know, maybe they'll have Elon derangement syndrome and not allow that, but it makes sense to have a site in New Zealand too. You know, maybe a couple other places in the world where they could do launches.
You don't?
I think the U.S. government would allow
like
it.
that.
What's that?
I don't think Peter Beck in Rocket Lab would like that very much. That was a bad Kiwi accent. Yeah, you know, the Rocket Lab does have an amazing launch facility in New Zealand. You know, they've got a surprising amount of launch infrastructure built almost entirely on the back of Rocket Lab and Peter Beck. So that could be another option. It does make sense to have some different locations. I mean, generally speaking, you want to be launching east if you can. And so doing that in a different part of the world than North America would give you some potentially easier access to different orbits than they have out of Corpus Christi and Florida. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see them open up the some different launch pads in different geographies over time. But yeah, overall, like, I think this is a really big opportunity. Yeah, I think that the big takeaway for me though is this isn't science fiction. This isn't like something our great grandkids might experience, which was kind of my thought before. I think this actually could be coming pretty quickly. The technology is already here, and the data center demand and the energy demand is so huge, and it shows no sign of slowing down. And so I think this is a necessity is the mother of invention sort of thing, where you normally wouldn't go through all the headache of trying to figure out these massive engineering challenges, but because you're trying to scale up compute to such massive extents, I think that's why this is more real than any of us would have thought, 2, 3, 4 years ago.
All right, so we covered a lot of ground there. I'd like to show you one more thing before we go. I thought this was pretty cool. Pretty cool robot. So the wheels, they can either drive the robot or they can be like a stationary or braked fashion. So they can act like a foot or they can act like a wheel, depending on the surface. I thought was especially impressive about that was how snowy, icy that was.
Hmm.
Um, do you think next year is the year of the embodied robot, or do you think we're at least one more year away?
Yeah, I think 27 is the year of the embodied robot. I think 26 is the year of autonomy. Um, maybe that's just the Tesla bull in me saying, okay, 26 is robotaxis, 27 is Optimus. But I think there's still so many challenges, and the biggest one being like you got to take that cool capability. But I'm guessing that wasn't like an economic delivery where they had a positive gross margin on that. And so like I think we're still quite a ways away from that. I think we'll get there over time, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done on like the joints on these things and like figuring some of that stuff out. And the bigger piece is just the software. So how do you, kind of handle? In that case, it looks like it's making a delivery of some sort. So how do you
Mhm.
undercut, a DoorDash driver for that type of application? To make it an economically useful product or service, I guess, rather than just like a really cool demo that is admittedly technologically compelling. So I think we're still a little further away from being economically useful on the humanoid or on the embodied robot side.
I know we don't think of cars as drones, but what we saw in the video is a drone. We
Hmm.
getting more air deliveries, delivering your Amazon packages to your backyard rather than your front porch. It's easier to hide stuff in the backyard. Uh, though we don't want porch bandits roaming our backyards. That would be pretty bad. Um, I, I think that delivery robot we saw from River or whatever, you could poop out the food out the back of it, right?
That
You
might
squat
have.
down and drop it out.
I suppose that's possible. I don't. I would think if you got like a pizza being delivered or something, you probably don't want to like squeeze it out a tiny hole. I think getting the box safely off the back of the dog would be a better option.
It just slides out. Yeah, so things are getting interesting. It's fun. I think, yeah, we're gonna see a much different world within 10 years, easy. I think it's gonna be five or less for robotics, and I don't think people are ready for this. It makes me think about X. X is like the place where the futurists are and the technologists and people actually doing cool things with technology. And so I'm very thankful for X with that. X is what turned me on to Tesla back in 2019.
Yeah, kind of same. I mean, it wasn't exactly what turned me on to it, but like that was where I went to kind of sound out my ideas, hear from the bears because they were very loud and they seemed to have the lion's share of the mind share back then. Um, but it was like extremely valuable because I was hearing their arguments, picking them apart and saying, okay, I think they're wrong, and I think my view is right. And over time, that's proven to be the case. One other thought, maybe just to wrap some of the various strands that we've had in this conversation. There do seem to be a lot of pessimists out there. I think a lot of the stuff that we're talking about with Europe, I think it stems from pessimism of like there's bad actors in the world and Elon is one of them, and we need to protect our people, we need to
Mhm.
protect our jobs. It's this
Yeah.
defensive posture, it's this negativity about technology being a force for bad. I listened to a podcast recently too with one of the SEC kind of architects of some of the crypto regulation when Gary Gensler was in charge there, and he just had an extremely pessimistic, like intellectually sound but inherently pessimistic view of the technology and of the world and what could the bad actors do. And I think that was driving a lot of the regulation over time, which was very uh, kind of it contained the crypto industry in many ways. I think the optimists of the world are the ones who actually are building stuff. They're the ones who are on X that are having, intellectually sound debates and that are trying to envision a better world for all of us. And so I'm happy to be in that optimist camp. Doesn't mean that we're going to get everything right, but I just think that's a healthier way to live, and I think it's closer to the truth, to be honest with you. So I'm. It's just a slight change in how I've been thinking about things recently. Is there really are people who are just fundamentally pessimistic, and it makes me sad.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'll be a good
Well,
investor
we'll
if you're a
see.
pessimist. Yeah.
No, and people are skeptical, just skeptical by default. They do it to protect themselves, but they're protecting themselves from making money, from doing well financially. So it's kind of sad. Well, he's Matt Smith. I'm Bradford Ferguson. We're definitely excited about the future. Thanks for Farzad for co-hosting this. And we're with rebellionaire.com. You can check us out. And with that, say bye for now.
Bye for now.